As we leave one lockdown to go into a tiered system which in most parts of the country looks just as restrictive, the people of Britain are getting pretty tired of COVID-19. Good timing then for this morning's announcement that UK regulators are the first in the world to approve a coronavirus vaccine for mass use. It's a decision that could transform our lives more than any government policy announced in the past 6 months, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Aaron Bastani to discuss the practical and political implications. Aaron, how are you doing?
I wouldn't rather be anywhere else, Michael Walker.
Other than in the front of a queue for a COVID vaccine?
I mean, that may be a matter of time, to be fair, because I'm asthmatic. I think I'm category 6. So I will be among the first people to be in receipt of this wonderful Pfizer vaccine.
I think category 6, you've still got about 15 million people above you, but we'll talk about these details as the show goes on. We are also going to be talking about tonight another great scientific advance that could rescue humanity from climate catastrophe and also, save a lot of trauma for our animal friends. I'll also be getting Aaron's take on the latest casualties of the UK high street, and we'll talk to you about Labour's racism scandal that Starmer doesn't want you to talk about. As always, we want to hear your comments, so do tweet on the hashtag #TyskySour. Are you excited for the vaccine? Are you sceptical? I know some people in the population are. It doesn't seem to be a big proportion of our audience, but we're always interested to hear what your takes are, and share the stream on social media. First story, which is the big story. Britain's independent medicines regulator has become the first in the world to give the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine approval, paving the way for mass rollouts from next week. This is Health Secretary Matt Hancock reacting to the news.
For so long we've been saying that if a vaccine is developed, then things will get better in 2021. And now we can say when this vaccine is rolled out, things will get better. And we'll start that process next week. So I'm obviously absolutely thrilled with the news. I'm very proud that the UK is the first place in the world to have a clinically authorised vaccine ready to go. The huge thanks to the scientists, to Pfizer, the company, obviously to my team and Kate Bingham and Alok Sharma, the business secretary, who's done a huge amount of work on this. But what it means for people is that from next week, we'll be able to start rolling this out. We'll start with those who are most vulnerable to coronavirus. And it will, you need 2 jabs, so 21 days apart. And after that, we will start protecting people as the protection comes with these 2 jabs, and it will help save lives. And then once we've started to and protected the most vulnerable, it will help us all get back to normal and back to all the things that we love.
The good news is that the approval is from an independent regulator, not from Matt Hancock, who does not come across as particularly confident with what he's talking about in that 1-minute clip. The UK has bought 40 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine, enough for 20 million people, 800,000 of which will be available from next week. That's at least what we're told. At this afternoon's Downing Street press briefing, Simon Stevens, who's chief executive of the NHS, explained the timings for the rollout of the vaccine.
In that, although we are the first health service in the world to be able to get vaccinating, supplies from the manufacturer are phased. So the initial tranche in December is going to enable us to get started, but the bulk of this vaccination programme, either through this vaccine or hopefully others as well that will join it, will take place in the period January through to March or April for the at-risk population. The majority of the early vaccinations will, as I say, be for the over 80s and for care home residents. And since you need 2 jabs with an initial injection and then a booster, typically around 21 days apart, that means that we've got to reserve the second dose for the people who are getting the first dose in December to make sure that that second dose is available for them. And it also means that the people who are getting the first dose in December will not have the full protection from the vaccine until they get the second dose in January.
So there's a couple of interesting points there. So one of them is about the timing of how long it will take for one to become immune after getting vaccinated. The BBC had a great graphic for this earlier today, which helped me understand it. So I thought I'd show you as well. So you can see that if you get vaccinated on day 1, it's only by day 12 that you start to build immunity. Then you have to get your second vaccine on day 21, so 3 weeks after the first one, and it's only by day 28, so 28 days after your first dose, that you will have full immunity to COVID-19. So this all sort of suggests that very few people will be immune by Christmas. So it doesn't seem like it's going to affect, to that great an extent, government policy over the next month or two. He also mentioned there that orders that people would be getting prioritised to get these vaccines. He was there just repeating what the government's vaccine task force laid out this morning. So we can get up the ordering of priorities here. So you can see, first of all, it's going to be going to residents in a care home for older adults and their carers. So that will probably use up, I imagine, all of the 800,000 doses. Then people 80 years or over and people who work in the NHS. They're obviously, the people who work in the NHS are the people who it's easiest to vaccinate, because it seems like these are going to have to be done in hospitals, and that's where NHS workers are. And then it basically goes by age. Alongside 70-year-olds, you'll get clinically extremely vulnerable individuals, and then after 65-year-olds, you'll get people who are between 16 and 64 with underlying health conditions. I suppose the only controversial bit here that I've sort of seen people raise, which I think is very much a valid point, is that there doesn't seem to be much attention given to people who might not be in a high age category or have clinical vulnerabilities, but who are vulnerable because of their job. So I've heard people say, should teachers not be getting some sort of priority here, because they're going into what are essentially COVID factories every day? So a good compromise when we're saying, look, we value education so much that you have to go into a dangerous workplace, would be to say, but you get a vaccine first. I know that in America they are sort of prioritizing essential workers over and above people who are in older age categories. So I'm not quite sure how these different decisions are being made. One final clip from that press conference. This is Jonathan Van Tam, who's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, and he is here with a new poetic metaphor to describe the current phase in our pandemic journey.
I gave you the train analogy many weeks ago now. The train has now slowed down safely. It has now stopped in the station, and the doors have opened. That was the authorization by the MHRA. What we need now is for people to get on that train and travel safely to their destinations. Those destinations are all over the UK. This train is going to stop several times on the way. It's going to have to reach all parts of the UK. There will be trains that come behind it, and that is all going to take time. So everyone needs to be delighted with the news today, but equally patient and realistic about how this rolls out over the next few months.
I do really like the guy. As what we always say on the show, he's the government official who I'm sort of most, I most enjoy hearing. Although I'm not quite sure that metaphor adds up, because I can see, the train makes you feel like this is the vaccine getting delivered around the country, but you also have to get on the train. I don't know where you get taken to. All a bit bizarre. Anyway, Aaron, this is an unambiguously good news story, is it not?
Unambiguously, are there any downsides? Well, we don't think so. I mean, you and I aren't sort of vaccine skeptics. However, I mean, in terms of it being an unalloyed good story, I mean, people like yourself probably aren't looking till gone summer next year before you get a vaccine, presumably. If we're looking at potentially 10, 15, 20 million people being in receipt of it before somebody like you, healthy, young-ish, then we're going to see significant disruption for a pretty long time to come. So I think for most people, it does seem like this will still be a major part of our lives into the spring. However, it's been the best bit of news we've had really since late March, which was a very long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, the other point there, though, is it's not necessarily the case that if you don't fall into one of these categories. So they've said that the main vaccinations for people in vulnerable categories, who I assume is probably anyone who falls into one of these categories over 50 or with an underlying condition, that will be between January and April. So presumably if you are under 50 and don't have an underlying health condition, you're going to have to wait until after April. But the converse of that is if you aren't at risk, the only reason why you're not allowed to go out and socialize is because that will endanger people who are at risk. So even if me as a fairly healthy person who's under 50 am not vaccinated, the reason I can't go get pissed in a pub and scream and shout is because that will spread the virus to people who can be severely affected. Whereas if all of the people who can be severely affected are vaccinated, then potentially you won't have to be vaccinated before you can live a full life. We'll have to wait.
And also
see.
we know that, just with the changes of the seasons, if we have a relatively warmish May, it could be that de facto this is kind of done by May. That could be the case. Equally, we've been going through this now for 8 months. Another 3 or 4 months is going to be hard, right? Another 3 or 4 months, and there'll be many businesses. That'll be one of our stories later on. We'll talk about which will struggle with this. We talk about the big businesses that get access to credit and loans and so on, but there are many small businesses too, really, really struggling. So, brilliant news, and it can't come quickly enough. But we've still got a very long way to go, and the economic damage as well. The economic and social damage from this is crazy. It's going to be with us for a very long time to come.
So another significant thing Jonathan Van Tam said in that press briefing this afternoon was he was saying that coronavirus is not going to go away, at least according to his prediction. So he's saying this is probably going to be a disease that is with us forever, but it could be something that we manage seasonally as with the flu. So, we all saw in the summer, it didn't seem to be that damaging. Not many people caught COVID-19. It's in the winter that it gets, out of control. So we might just have a program of vaccinating people once a year, as we do with the flu, because of course it seems to have no idea how long immunity lasts from the vaccine. As far as I can tell, we just have to wait and see. So it'll only be 12 months after the first set of people get vaccinated that we'll know if your immunity lasts 12 months. I haven't heard of a more sort of scientific way of predicting that.
In terms of the antibody production, has there been because I've read nothing about that. I mean, they seem confident, like you say, that it's going to last for at least a season, although I thought there's a possibility it could last for less than that.
It's everything I've seen seems to suggest they think a season will be fine. But I don't know. Again, this is probably something we'll need to get one of the proper immunologists on for. But no, to me, it seems like they're pretty confident this will be at least a season that you'll be immune for.
So like the flu vaccine.
Exactly.
And if you're particularly worried, you can go and, by the way, people can, I didn't realize this until a week ago, you can buy a flu vaccine just privately for like 15 quid.
From Boots or from wherever?
Yeah, I get mine from my GP because I'm an asthmatic, but it's interesting. Maybe that would be something as well that becomes a normal part of our everyday lives.
Or one day a year at least, or twice. We need to cover some of the political nonsense that surrounded today's announcement. This was Business Secretary Alok Sharma. He tweeted, "The UK was the first country to sign a deal with Pfizer-BioNTech. Now we will be the first to deploy their vaccine. To everyone involved in this breakthrough, thank you. In years to come, we will remember this moment as the day the UK led humanity's charge against this disease." This is not just some, wacky backbencher. This is Britain's business secretary, who seems to think that when the history books are written, what they'll care about is which regulatory agency approved the vaccine first, as opposed to how it was actually developed. This is groundbreaking technology that BioNTech and Pfizer were involved in developing. The first time that mRNA technology has been used in a vaccine. I don't think the history books are going to care that Britain gave it regulatory approval on the 1st of December, whereas Germany gave it regulatory approval on the 14th of December. But anyway, we can...
But it does say a lot about, we're innovative Britain, we have such an innovative economy. It went from, we have world-class industrial policy, that went after the 70s. We have a world-class sort of research base, that's gone. And now it's just like, this drug developed elsewhere by a pair of Turkish immigrants in Germany, developed by a major American pharmaceutical company. We're the first market. That doesn't make Britain an innovative country. It doesn't mean it's particularly well governed even. But it speaks to the slide and the absence of industrial and research policy in this country. David Edgerton, very good on this, by the way. We had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago on Novara Media. Well, go check that out.
We could see the Oxford vaccine come through, though, which will, that will be more of there'll be more genuine claim to say that was a British innovation.
That is very quickly, Ernest Bevin said when Britain developed the atom bomb during the 40s, he said, I want Britain to have it and I want a Union flag on it. You can see that kind of politics, immuno-nationalism with Glaxo vaccine. With this, it seems a bit pathetic, really.
The German ambassador wasn't impressed So whilst we're saying that the British would have claim at least when it comes to the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Oxford vaccine, the Germans aren't crowing too much about the fact that the technology for the BioNTech vaccine was developed there. This is their ambassador to Britain. Responding to Alok Sharma this morning. Why is it so difficult to recognise this important step forward as a great international effort and success? I really don't think this is a national story. In spite of the German company BioNTech having made a crucial contribution, this is European and transatlantic. So they seem less desperate to make out that this is, Germany coming to the rescue, whereas Alok Sharma wants you to believe that this is a British achievement. That is perhaps to do with an insecurity on the part of the British when it comes to the history or the recent history of their pandemic response. If you've watched this show, you'll know the Germans have done pretty well when it comes to limiting deaths and economic damage, and it is very much the opposite story for the UK. On Tuesday this week, so yesterday, and we found out that COVID-19 deaths in Britain had surpassed 75,000. So that's a higher figure than you hear at the daily Downing Street press briefings, because they only include people who've died within 28 days of a positive COVID test, whereas this 75,000 figure is from people who had COVID-19 mentioned on the death certificate. Now, the big differential there will be from people who died in the first wave, because that's when we weren't testing many people, but coroners could make a good guess that the reason many of these people were dying from pneumonia was that they had COVID-19. That is the highest in Europe. And we can also see in terms of the economy that Britain's record is really bad here as well. It's just as bad as on health. So this is graphic 9, Fox, if we can get this up. So this is a forecast from the OECD, which showed that we are likely to be the hardest hit in Europe in terms of the economy, just as we're the hardest hit in terms of deaths, with only Argentina taking a bigger hit when it comes to OECD countries and the effect that COVID-19 has had on them. Now, what this all made me think, and sort of the political tone we've seen today with this great announcement about the vaccine, is how many miles away we seem from back in the summer when everyone was talking about we need a public inquiry. We need a public inquiry into the government's response to coronavirus because of the unbelievable amount of deaths that we had in this country because of government errors and unforced errors. Other countries were going into lockdown when we weren't, and that caused tens of thousands of people to die. At that point in time, the government was saying, yes, we'll have an inquiry, but we'll do it in the future. My guess now, and I want to put this to you, Aaron, is now we have this vaccine, and it seems like the end of the pandemic might be in sight. I mean, the Tories are not going to say, oh yeah, let's have a public inquiry about all the mistakes we made last summer. They're going to say, look, this is solved now. Brilliant achievement from the scientists. Let's put all of this behind us. Yeah. And basically try and, put a sort of protective shield around the past 12 months and say, that's all history now. Yeah. Go get your vaccine and we can all move on.
Yeah. They want to put the last 12 months into a historical bubble, which has no contact with an ongoing organic conversation amongst the rest of us. That's entirely right. What they will want to do is to put to bed the public health crisis, which we've endured, and just talk purely about the economy. So they'll be very happy to talk about how calamitous and ruinous the finances are, and the fact we've hit a debt-to-GDP ratio of 100%, because that allows them to oversee more privatisation, outsourcing, austerity. My worry is, and by the way, they wouldn't be able to get away with that if you had a Labour opposition worth its salt on this. And we don't know if that will happen or not, right? If you're being charitable to Keir Starmer, he hasn't been assertive and confrontational for the last 8 months, because there has been an ongoing public health crisis. He does have the opportunity, once this is over, to do precisely what you're saying and say, we need an inquiry, and to be very assertive and to say, heads should roll over this. If he doesn't, this is no longer merely a strategy in dealing with a country split into, polarized. I think it's just an ineffective politician who's out of his depth and who is pathologically incapable of confrontation. I don't know which will happen, by the way, but I think it will not unfold like that unless there's pressure from the opposition. You're seeing it in Wales, you're seeing it in Scotland, you're not seeing it in England. And of course, the main party of opposition in England is the Labour Party. Again, that could change. But we do have to have a conversation about the mismanagement here. It's caused huge economic and health consequences in the long term. 100% debt. By the way, that doesn't really matter. The debt to GDP could be 200%. But the point is, the public debt was half what it is now in 2010, and David Cameron was going to the electorate saying the country's bankrupt. It's now double that. And so we could have used that money had we had an adequate response to deal with this in March and April. We could now be in that kind of debt, having broadly decarbonised the economy, having made tuition fees free, having created high-speed internet and rail infrastructure across the country. We haven't spent the money on that, and we've spent the money on other things instead because we had an economic and political model fundamentally incapable of dealing with this in the early stages, like Vietnam, like Cuba, like Korea, and to a lesser extent like Germany. So big questions need to be asked. Of course we need an inquiry. Goodness.
We've got a tweet on the hashtag Tysky Sour. Jonathan Van Tam's analogies sound like the final riddle round of 3-2-1 with Ted Rogers. They didn't make any sense either. That's gone over my head. Do you know what 3-2-1 with Ted Rogers is, Sarah?
I'm not going to be rude and say it's before my time, but I mean, maybe it's before my time, or maybe it's an Australian.
Maybe it's after your time.
Maybe it's more. Maybe
we're too old
TikTok.
for that.
Maybe it's TikTok and Gen Z.
And Dan Smith with a $5 super chat. Does Keir Starmer remind anyone else of Dan Miller from The Thick of It? I can't remember what the different characters are called.
I've never watched a single minute of The Thick of It.
It's quite entertaining, but obviously I'm not a big enough fan to know who Dan Miller is, so I wasn't paying enough attention. Let's go to our next story. Before we do that, it's very much related. Do share the show stream because your friends are going to want to see this ridiculous intervention from a Tory MP in the House of Commons yesterday. Very much related to vaccines. We've got 1,700 people watching. We can get that above 2,000 tonight on this momentous historical day. Britain has become the first country to authorise a vaccine at the spearhead of anyway, I'm not going to do that bullshit. Not for me. Less than 12 months after COVID-19 was discovered, we have one approved vaccine and at least 2 more on the way. But now medical science has made the necessary advances, attention is turning to more parochial matters. How do we get enough people to take the damn thing? Our government has been clear vaccination will not be mandatory, but they have suggested a person's vaccination status could be displayed in the NHS Test and Trace app, which businesses might decide to use as a condition of entry. This modest proposal received pushback from Tory MP Desmond Swain in Tuesday's Commons debate on COVID tiers.
The way to persuade people to have a vaccine is, of course, to line up the entire government and its ministers and their loved ones and let them take it first, and then get all the lovies, the icons of popular culture, out on the airwaves singing its praises. To have any kind of suggestion of coercion absolutely feeds the conspiracy theory that we're being cowed and our liberties being taken away.
I'm extremely grateful to him for giving way. Will he agree with me that it's not enough for the government merely to refrain from coercing people? The government's also got to pay attention to implicit coercion. That is, if the government turns a blind eye to allowing businesses like airlines and restaurants to refuse to let people in unless they've had the vaccination, the government's got to decide whether it's willing to allow people to discriminate on that basis.
Discrimination. It would be vaccinationism, which we must, of course, resist.
So there we have it. Desmond Swain, who is not the most alert MP to equalities issues. Remember, he is the MP who got caught doing blackface a few years ago. And he since, when the images surfaced, he said he'd happily do it again. He has now identified a new form of discrimination, vaccinationism. Aaron, I want to go straight to you on this. Do you think that this will be a new form of liberation politics, fighting discrimination against those who refuse vaccines?
The 2010 Equality Act is quite interesting, and I don't know where this would fit in it. But
I'm sure whether you're vaccinated or not is not a protected characteristic.
Well, I mean, the idea that somebody can't enter a business on the basis of them not having had a vaccine, I mean, that is quite dangerous territory. It's quite a dangerous precedent. I mean, personally, I think it's entirely reasonable, but it would be a strange precedent. There isn't anything in my mind that precedes it.
Yeah, there aren't many. You're right. There aren't many analogies that sort of relate to that.
If I owned a business, by the way, I would do that. I don't want anybody to sort of misrepresent what I'm saying here. But it does represent a major step in terms of prescribing who can and cannot enter a certain space.
Mm. The suggestion was made, by the way, on because there hasn't been an official government announcement on this, but Nadeem Zahawi, he's now the vaccine minister, was speaking to PM on Monday, and with Evan Davies, and he sort of, it was The World at One, and he was suggesting that whilst the government won't make the vaccine mandatory, and it won't be a condition of access to state services that one has a vaccine, it could be fed into the Test and Trace app, and that means that businesses may or may not choose to make it a condition of entry. So it's similar to things that would relate to equalities legislation, because it's saying, do businesses have the right or not to discriminate on this basis? I mean, it's not a protected characteristic, so I don't think the Equalities Act would have much to say. But you're right, that's the territory we're in.
The Equalities Act is a really expansive. It's a really expansive piece of legislation. I mean, it's been used in such a variety of ways, and I agree with you. But I think, there could be something there. I mean, so what again, do we take it a step further? Have you had a flu vaccine this year? Sorry, you can't enter the restaurant. I mean, I don't think anybody would find that a legitimate.
Actually, you might have that with care homes. I wonder if that could well be the case with care homes. We'll have to look into it.
We'll look into it.
In the comments, if you know that a vaccine is if you have to have a vaccine to access some service, be it public or private, let us know in the comments. We'd be interested to know. This does lead to a talking point, though, which has been big in the news today, and I sort of have a theory about why it's being talked about so much, which is vaccine skepticism, which is this idea that people are going to be so suspicious of this that they don't get it, and that sort of undermines our progress against defeating the virus. I personally think the reason this keeps coming up is because people on the news need something to talk about. So obviously the vaccine being approved is a massive story, huge story. But most people who present news, like myself, we did humanities degrees. We can't really engage that deeply in how a vaccine works. So you want to talk about human behavior. And so to me, it seems as if vaccine skepticism as a problem has been somewhat blown out of proportion in this country. I'm pretty confident that once the vaccine is offered to people are going to get it, or at least enough people are going to get it.
I don't know about your views on this. I've noticed this a lot with the BBC, because obviously the BBC has a huge presence online, radio, TV, and they're just having to pump out stories which are just absurd, like 3 things you can do for winter self-care. This isn't like Cosmo magazine, this is BBC. You're meant to be doing like original news gathering. And I feel like that's absolutely true, Michael. Such a good point. There's such a dearth of other stories that they're doing the opposite of what they're meant to do, which is to inform, educate, entertain. And actually, there's an element potentially of misinformation where you amplify stories which actually aren't that big. How many anti-vaxxers have you met? I mean, I saw a very small protest the other day, but generally speaking, I've not met anybody who doesn't want a vaccine and for a semblance of normality to return.
There was a YouGov poll on this today, so we can see the extent of skepticism towards the vaccine. They asked, how confident are you how confident, if at all, are you that the recently approved Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine is safe? 70% said very, somewhat confident, and only 20% said not very, not at all confident. Now, you can also imagine that even if someone is not very confident, they'll still take the vaccine if they get a letter from their doctor, which is very much implying that it's your civic duty to do this. Also remember that this was only approved today. I suppose one thing that will be that is material for vaccine skeptics to work on is the fact that this has been approved very quickly in this country. You also did see today that the European regulators have been a little bit critical of Britain's regulators approving this so quickly. They're sort of saying, we're looking at all the data properly, we don't think we should rush these things, basically implying that the British had rushed this. As far as I can tell, I'm not too worried about this. It seems like they have truncated the process, and whereby they've been gathering data throughout this whole process. So it's not that they've just looked at all the data over the last 3 weeks. They've been looking at all the data over the last bunch of months. And I haven't really seen anyone who seems particularly significant suggesting that the fact that the British regulators have given this approval now is particularly problematic. I don't know, what's your take on this?
No, I entirely.
Should they have waited?
I entirely agree. And also, look, there are that poll showed there are large majorities in every single age group. Surprising, actually, that over 65s, in a way, showed the largest lead for those who have full confidence in the vaccine. Often they're so at odds with. There seems to be this strange polarization between younger and older people. Here, not really. But like you say, given 12 months ago, nobody even really knew this thing existed. We've had basically a shutdown of the entire global economy. Life as usual has completely been transformed. and before the end of the year we get a new vaccine, right? And I think that's very difficult to comprehend. So the fact that 25% of people are kind of suspicious and skeptical, I think it's not rational, but I would expect it. It's explicable. And so I was kind of surprised at those numbers. And I don't think it speaks to the fact there's a large anti-vaxxer movement. As hard as people like Nigel Farage have tried, it doesn't really seem to have cut through. Simply because, there's a necessity at work here as well, right? You need to get money to work, to pay your rent, to live. You need a modicum of normality to return. It's a bit of a luxury. A lot of people can't afford to be skeptical about this thing. They really want it to work.
Well, you can if you can opt out, though, obviously, because if there's no vaccine passports anywhere, then you can, it's a
and that explains the 25%
collective action problem, isn't it? You can say, I won't get it, but there'll be some sort of herd immunity,
and that
but
explains
I'm not taking the risk.
the 25-30% who feel that way. But there's clearly a majority that support this across every age group, and one of the reasons is necessity. The last 8 months have been horrendous, and people want this to be over.
This is very interesting. Alison Dodds tweets on the hashtag Tysky Sour, I have 5 employees in my small business. 2 say they won't have the vaccine, 2 on the fence, and 1 has said yes. Well, that's not a very good ratio, is it? I would love to make it a condition of employment as we work with children who won't be vaccinated. Oh, wow. Interesting. Yeah, so it's, well, as I say, me and Aaron aren't sure if...
We had somebody in the comments,
probably a condition of employment, you wouldn't be able to discriminate on that basis.
There was somebody in the comments.
Law is much stronger. Well,
somebody in the comments, maybe you can come back up in the comments, they were saying that certain health workers need to be tested for, I think it was hepatitis B. So there probably is some kind of precedent. If you can put that back in the comments, we'd be very grateful. I'll keep my eyes peeled.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that rings a bell, actually. Yeah, you have to be vaccinated for hepatitis B before you can work in certain healthcare settings. And obviously, actually, you have to get certain vaccinations before you can go to certain countries. So these conditions do exist. Right, let's go on to our next story, which is not about vaccines, but about a scientific development, which is just as exciting, actually. Lab-grown meat could put an end to the phenomenal levels of animal cruelty in our food supply. It could also play a key role in mitigating against runaway climate change. It's good news, then, that for the first time ever, cultured meat has been approved for commercial use. This is reported in The Guardian. It is a chicken product. Lab-grown chicken has been approved to be sold in a Singaporean restaurant. I think at the moment it's going to be quite expensive, but it could get cheaper. Let's go to a quote from that story. The cells for Eat Just's product are grown in a 1,200-litre bioreactor and then combined with plant-based ingredients. Initial availability would be limited, the company said, and the bites would be sold in a restaurant in Singapore. The product would be significantly more expensive than conventional chicken until production was scaled up, but Eat Just said it would ultimately be cheaper. Now, I wanted to bring this story up, particularly because it's happened in the last 24 hours, but also because this is one of Aaron's big talking points. There was a chapter in your book about lab-grown meat, wasn't there? So how significant is this that we've got the first lab-grown meat approved for commercial sale?
Meat without animals. Yeah, it's very exciting. If people go onto YouTube, they can see just video on this product. They've been talking about it for about a year, 18 months, and it's somebody with a feather. And there's a chicken walking around, and then they're making chicken. The idea of making meat from a feather is just absurd. I talk about the process in my book. Just have a product out already which has done extraordinarily well, which is a mayonnaise. And obviously there's lots of vegan mayonnaises, but this is it's a very good mayonnaise. They've also, I think, got an egg product, which is
I think they make lots of fake eggs.
Yeah, their egg products are really good, and basically they've made the eggs from, I think it's Just. There are a couple of big brands that I think it is Just. The eggs are basically made from a protein you get in a certain kind of pea, and they edited the protein and they scale it using, again, a gene-modified yeast. A lot of this is using yeast. Now, that's one kind of what's called cellular agriculture, which is you basically change the nature of a vegetable protein to more closely approximate meat. This is different in so much as you're getting the meat protein and you're effectively growing it in a bioreactor. So that's a bit different. That egg is a bit like, for instance, the Impossible Burger. The Impossible Burger produces something called heme. It gives what is a non-meat vegetarian burger the taste of meat, but it's not meat. This is definitively meat. These are animal proteins without the animals being involved. Now, chicken, minced chicken, or the kind of meat you'd get in these kinds of products, this is the kind of entry-level product, like minced meat, chicken, generic white fish. The reason being it's very high levels of protein, very low levels of fat. And obviously with this kind of product, deep fried product, there's lots of flavorings and so on and so forth. And so it should be pretty good. It should be pretty good. And again, a year ago, 2 years ago, people were saying that 2020 was the year that they would begin to see commercially viable products, fish products as well. Another company called Finless Foods have been on this. And I think they'll be getting products out in the next 6 months, probably. The big problem, where it gets difficult, and this is great, you know, I think it's perfectly plausible. We have chicken nuggets and, you know, battered fish and burgers and sausages, which are indistinguishable from what we presently eat and have no animals at all. The problem is when you want to get bacon, steaks, things that basically are a mix of meat proteins, but also fats, adipose tissue. It's very complex. Can that happen? I think it probably can. Will it take a long time? Probably quite a while, yes, and it will be very expensive. But this stuff, I think, in the next 5 years will become increasingly common. And I don't just think it will be as tasty or even tastier, it will also be cheaper and healthier. And most importantly, from the perspective of environmental concerns, these products will allow us to live within the planet's biocapacity without, you know, abjuring various meat products. So land, water, labor demands for these products are much lower. And of course, the CO2 emissions, the methane emissions are a fraction of what they presently are. So a huge breakthrough. The technology's been there for a while. You know, the first lab-grown beef burger was 2013. But to go from that, which cost $350,000 for one beef burger, to go from that to a product which people can actually access out there in the real world within 7 years is really remarkable. And it makes you wonder, where will we be in 7 years' time? You know, it may be that actually a lot of us will be eating these kinds of products rather than meat coming from animals.
Is this one of those ones where, you know, so we talked before about, you know, what are the political implications that Big Pharma has come up with these incredible vaccines in such a short space of time. And it's basically that if the government decides that they want to spend billions on making something happen, then it can happen.
Yeah.
You know, everyone was like, oh, it's impossible to have a vaccine in 10 months. It will take 10 years. Then there was sort of the motive on the part of international governments to say, no, we're going to make this happen super quick. If governments put behind, you know, a similar amount of money with fake meat, or it's not fake meat, but lab-grown meat, then presumably they could truncate this process and we'd end up having meat which is cheaper, healthier, more environmentally friendly in a 2-year period instead of a 20-year period.
Yeah.
And that could be one of the investments that helps us, you know, avoid catastrophic climate change.
Yeah. So, I mean, I talk about this in the book. The reason why you're seeing that change in the price-performance ratio, so that first burger cost $350,000. Now those chicken, that popcorn chicken, whatever it's going to be, I'm sure it's not cheap. It's probably like $20 or whatever, but it's clearly a fraction of what it was 7 years ago. That is because of something called the experience curve. First kind of isolated by the Boston Consulting Group quite a few decades ago. And that's basically, you have a bunch of variables, and normally when you double the production of something, its price falls by about 15 to 20%. And we see this in a bunch of things: lithium-ion batteries, solar cell technology, wind turbines. You produce more of it, and it's cheaper to make, and it's quicker to produce. And anybody who's had a job ever knows this, right? Let's say your first job, you worked in a pizza parlor. Your first pizza was terrible. Your second one's a bit better. After you made a couple of hundred pizzas, you're pretty good. And that's a pretty good metaphor of understanding technological developments with this stuff. Now, you're absolutely right. That can be accelerated by saying, you know what? And I think this is something that government should be looking to do. We want these kinds of substitutes in school meals, and the complete ban, by the way, of meat from other sources by 2026. And I think that's a very effective government intervention. Now, the counter argument would be, we shouldn't be backing winners. You know, sometimes the state tries this kind of industrial policy, Concord, and it doesn't work. And that's a fair point to an extent, right? Although, of course, the alternative is the United States government has basically created every major innovation in the last 60 years. But, as you've said, the positive externalities of this, health, cost, environment, are so high that I think we probably should be having major government investment in these technologies. And you're absolutely right. You know, we could, as a species, move beyond animal agriculture within 10 years if we had to. And this does relate to COVID as well, by the way, because COVID-19, the third distinct coronavirus this century. Why? Because we are subordinating the entirety of the planet's wilderness to human civilization. You are seeing wild species of animal, flora and fauna, coming into contact with agriculture. So that's how you get a virus which goes among bats for a long time, going to a pig and then to a human. So it's all interconnected, and it makes sense from a public health point of view, a cost point of view, a personal health point of view, an environmental point of view, for us to give up animal products as quickly as possible. Now, on the one hand, you can say, well, we should all be vegan. I'm sure many of our viewers think we should all be vegan. That's not going to happen. The rising demand for animal products worldwide is all coming from the global south. Good luck telling hundreds of millions of Nigerians, Somalis, Chinese, people from all over the planet, you can't eat the same amount of meat proteins as somebody in North America or Western Europe. They're not going to listen to you. So that's where this stuff comes in. And you're absolutely right. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to make a huge difference in terms of environmental outcomes. We grow more we use more cereals to feed animals than we feed ourselves. Animal agriculture is incredibly inefficient, particularly from the perspective of water and land. Deforestation in the Amazon, Southeast Asia, primarily because of, yes, palm oil, but also beef is a huge one, particularly the Amazon. So this is huge news. And if there's a bunch of technologies we should be accelerating in the 21st century, cellular agriculture is definitely one of them.
I feel inspired, positively inspired. Invest in cellular agriculture, especially if you're a major government. We are going to take a little break. So you're going to have a couple of minutes to make a cup of tea. We'll have a little video for you as well. And then we will be back to talk about two huge stories. So one, the collapse of Debenhams and Arcadia, what it means for the high street. What are the causes? Is it just because of the internet, because of COVID, or is it also because of something called private equity? And then we're going to finish on Labour's dodgy donor. See you in a couple of minutes.
It hasn't been an easy year, but we're exceptionally proud of the journalism we've been able to do with your support so far. From our twice daily analysis of the coronavirus crisis to our original reporting of the Labour leaks, we've been working around the clock to provide the news and analysis you just won't find anywhere else.
We're no longer a volunteer organisation being run out of a glorified shipping container. We're breaking stories and setting the agenda and giving the mainstream media a run for their money.
2021 is going to be Novara Media's most ambitious year yet. We want to do more podcasts, more original news gathering, and allocate resources to do original investigative reporting.
But to break new ground in 2021, we need to raise our monthly income, and fast.
That's why we're trying to raise an extra £5,000 in monthly donations by Christmas. You can help us do this in one of two ways. First, if you're not already a Novara Media supporter, now's the time to become one.
Second, if you're already a supporter, we're asking you to increase your donation by a few pounds each month.
However you want to support us, just head to novaramedia.com/support. We cannot emphasise it enough. All the work we do depends on your donations.
Who knows what's going to happen in 2021, but one thing is for certain. There's never been a better time to build a new media for a different politics, and it can't happen without you.
So at the start of that break, you would have seen our new fundraising call out. I just have to say, when we shared that on Twitter yesterday, the reaction from people was so lovely to see. Lots of people talking about, how much Novara means to them and how much they want to see it grow in the coming year. So, if you're paying attention, you'll know the asks. If you already are a subscriber, please do consider raising your monthly donation. And if not, what are you waiting for? Go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, because we have massive plans in the coming year, but we do need your support to make them happen. Straight into our next story. On Tuesday, Debenhams joined Arcadia as the latest big high street chain to go into administration. All 124 stores run by the 240-year-old business will be closed down after the Christmas period, putting 13,000 jobs at risk. So the collapse of the business came after a potential deal with JD Sports was abandoned in the wake of the new news that Arcadia had gone bust. So Debenhams stocked many products that were created by Arcadia, so they were connected in that sense. Combined, the collapse of Arcadia, which includes Topshop and Burton, and Debenhams, means 25,000 jobs are likely to be lost at a time when new vacancies are few and far between. So why has this happened? How can a business that survived 240 years go instantly down the pan? Now, there are a bunch of plausible explanations. So one is that this is all to do with COVID-19, coronavirus. Obviously, if you are a high street store, then you have suffered over the past 9 months. Much lower footfall, especially when you're forced to be closed, and also closing and reopening over and over again comes with many costs. Also, the longer term trend of people shopping on the internet more. But less discussed, and potentially just as fundamental, is the parasitic nature of private equity billionaires who had doomed Arcadia and Debenhams long before COVID-19 passed from bats to humans. So on the role of private equity in Debenhams' decline, The Guardian had some very useful context. We can go to this. So they write, the retailer was taken over in 2003 by a private equity consortium. The trio of funds, TPG, CVC Capital and Merrill Lynch, made huge returns from their £600 million investment, collecting £1.2 billion in dividends despite owning the company for less than 3 years. Debenhams owed around 100 million when it was taken private, but by the time it returned to the stock market in 2006, that debt had swollen to more than £1 billion. After the retailer's subsequent poor performance, the deal came to epitomise the worst excesses of the private equity model, the quick flip, whereby investors buy a listed business cheaply, load it with debt, and then refloat it at a big profit. So later in the article, they go on to explain the consortium had used £1.1 billion of debt to acquire the business, and Templeman cut borrowing costs by remortgaging some of the stores. In 2005, 23 shops were sold for £495 million. Debenhams leased the stores back on expensive rent deals up to 35 years in length. Now, this is all so parasitic. And this is something we don't talk about. You know, if you listen to BBC Radio, they do mention it every now and again, the fact that private equity had a role in this. But nearly all of it will be based on the fact that, people shop on the internet now. So of course these businesses are going to die. COVID-19 happened. So of course these businesses are going to die. But the numbers speak for themselves there. So you've got companies who borrowed, $1 billion odd to buy this firm. And then within 2 years, they've taken more money than that out of the company to put straight into their pockets in dividends, or they've sort of borrowed loads of money to buy the business. Then they sell, now they own the business, they sell all the business's assets to themselves and then lease them back to the business. So it's completely parasitic. And there's a very similar story with Arcadia. So Arcadia, you will have heard of Philip Green. We've talked about him on this show before. He bought Arcadia for £850 million in 2002. He then hands over ownership to his wife, who lives in Monaco, which is a tax haven, by the way. And then 3 years later, the Greens pay themselves £1.2 billion in dividends, on which they pay no tax. So you can see the sums speak for themselves. In 2002, he buys it for £850 million. 2 years later, or 3 years later, he pays himself way more than the amount he bought it for. Aaron, I want to go to you on this because I know you've been talking a lot about the high street recently, but on this question of private equity, how much do you think these firms, these sort of parasitic firms who say we're going to buy this business in distress, basically sell all of its assets, potentially to ourselves, and pay ourselves in dividends, how much is that to blame for the collapse of, in the case of Debenhams, a 240-year-old establishment?
I think it's 100% to blame. Now, that's not to say there aren't major difficulties on the high street, but that money should be invested in updating your business to compete with online-based retailers like ASOS and Boohoo. Why is Amazon any different to Argos? Why does Amazon have this giant, they call Amazon the everything store? We've had a problem in this country for decades of companies like this being led by people like Philip Green, or in the instance of Debenhams, who have these various private equity groups. The focus is on how much money can I pay myself in dividends and how much can we get for the next quarter, rather than saying, will we have an outstanding business in 10, 20 years' time? Nobody running Debenhams or Sports Direct with Mike Ashley, it's slightly different there, different kind of market he's going for, or with British Home Stores and Philip Green, or with Philip Green and Arcadia Group now, that's not how they're thinking. That's not how they're thinking. The reality is, 2008 changes a great deal about retail. Of course, people have had less money in their pockets since 2010. I'm sure many people can remember this. Every Christmas until 2008, the big news story was people are spending more than ever before. Every year. And it was kind of sickening, actually, in a way, because Christmas is not meant to be about that. People are spending. People are addicted to shopping. They just loved saying it. Now, a lot of that was easy credit. A lot of that was people remortgaging their homes constantly and using the equity withdrawal to pay for private consumption. So it wasn't sustainable. But in any case, after 2008, particularly after 2010, yes, people have less money, but that's not the be all and end all here, because people are still buying things. You still have the rise of ASOS, Boohoo, Amazon is just doing phenomenally well. Jeff Bezos this year has increased his personal wealth by so much, he could give every single employee of Amazon worldwide $105,000 and he'd still be worth the same as he was at the beginning of 2020. I mean, it's crazy. So the values there are just being caught by different businesses because these other ones haven't kept up. And it's not just retailers. Another one's Cafe Nero. Cafe Nero's got big problems, and it's the exact same game with regards to private equity. They are not interested in long-term sustainable business, looking after that community, looking after their employees. And if you really care about free market capitalism, they don't even really care about providing an outstanding product. They don't care about any of these things, right? And you're entirely right to say it's absolutely parasitic. And I, for the life of me, anybody in this country will go outside, they'll walk down the local high street, including London after this news, by the way, the biggest retail store in central London. Where is it? Topshop Arcadia. Who the hell is going to fill that out? I can't. Who else? It's going to become student accommodation, I'm sure, because it's just so big. What else will it be? They're going to say the high street's really struggling. It has been for a long time. For more than 10 years, we need to do something about it. And even after all that, all we're really getting from the government, and sadly also from Labour, are empty words and sticking plasters. Pay the pensions. Of course they should pay the pensions, but like you say, there's a really big story here. In this particular instance, just these two groups, 25,000 jobs. But it's not just the 25,000 jobs. You go to large towns, small cities.
I'm going to stop you because we're going to go on to the broader points about the high street in a moment, because I'm going to show a little clip of your brilliant documentary. Before we do that, though, I just want to focus on specifically these businesses. So you might think, why are you blaming these private equity companies? All of these high street chains are going down the drain because of new developments in technology, etc. It doesn't really work for Arcadia because online clothes still hasn't kicked off, I was going to say that bigly, but that's a Trumpian word. It's not a real word. Hasn't kicked off in the same way that books has, for example, because people still like to try them on. This was a good graphic from the FT, which was sort of showing how Arcadia is actually bucking the trend. So you can see here that Next, Primark, JD Sports, H&M, ASOS obviously the online outlet there, they're all going up. Next, a little bit flat, apart from Arcadia. That's because it was bought by a billionaire who didn't have any interest in selling anything. He just had an interest in basically stripping a company of assets, which just so happens to put 12,000 people's jobs at risk. With Debenhams, you can do a similar comparison with John Lewis, who is not owned by an asset stripping private equity firm. In fact, has a bit of a partnership model, and they are still going from strength to strength because they've built this sort of space for them where they're like, we're the quality company. You can take stuff back to us. It's very unlike Amazon. We're going to talk about the broader implications for the high street, because you might be asking, why does this all matter? Why are we talking about how these corporate businesses who we didn't really like anyway have gone down the pan? Why do we care if a private equity firm has undermined the business prospects of Debenhams and Arcadia? And partly that's because, of course, the 25,000 jobs which these two companies in combination will be putting on the line. The other is the effect on high streets. And as I've already sort of mentioned, Aaron made an excellent video on this question just a couple of weeks ago. So what effect these collapses have on the high street. So I want to watch a clip from that, then I'll get Aaron's thoughts.
There have always, of course, been ups and downs to the high street, yet over the last 15 years it's become clear that something else is happening. The financial crash of 2008 firing a starting gun for decline, whose causes are changing shopping habits, the internet, out-of-town shopping centres, and the fact wages have been squeezed for more than a decade. This was all before COVID-19, which has seemingly accelerated and exacerbated this preceding trend. This is an important distinction to make. COVID isn't responsible for the death of the high street, but is without any shadow of a doubt accelerating pre-existing trends. I have a confession to make. I'm from Bournemouth. That flat there is where I lived for the first 10 years of my life, right in the middle of town. It was a great place to grow up and very different to today. This is Corrie Drew. She was the Labour candidate for Bournemouth East in the 2019 general election. She moved to Bournemouth around the same time I left to go to university in London.
Bournemouth was quite dazzling when I first moved here, and there certainly weren't empty shop units. the heart seems to be going out of it, and I think the pandemic potentially is going to really put the nail in the coffin. I think there's a real snowball effect with high streets because obviously the less money there is coming in for the shops and the businesses and also for the councils, the less there is to put into the area, and it starts to look a little scruffy, and over time all of that builds, and eventually it's not a nice place for people to go and spend their time.
This here is Mohammed Bagher, or Mamad for short. He's my dad, and he's been living in Bournemouth since the 1970s. He's been a taxi driver in the town for 20 years and knows the place as well as anyone else. His views on what the future holds for the town, particularly in the context of COVID-19, are particularly grim.
That's shots. All of them are shots. I feel many of the businesses won't come back. This is my personal opinion. Many of businesses won't come back. Many of the taxi drivers have given up and they are doing parcel delivery, they are doing takeaway delivery because they earn more money by doing a takeaway delivery than driving a taxi. People used to come down Bournemouth for shopping, they need taxi. For football, they need a taxi. And the student, they used to go out at night, they need a taxi to go back. Now we don't have students going out. There is no shopping and there is no football. So there is no business.
So I do recommend going to watch that whole mini documentary. Very nice to see a cameo from your dad in there, Aaron. I want to know though, what's the answer to all of this? If you've got high streets which are collapsing and you've got these big companies which are collapsing, do we demand that the high streets become something different? Should we get governments to be subsidising these places to be sort of, I don't know, further education colleges or something? What's the vision for the high street if brick and mortar shops, some of them will, presumably inevitably collapse?
I think it's a really good question. I don't think retail is going to die, by the way. I think what you're seeing is basically a bifurcation of, you're getting some really nice independent stores. They're definitely doing quite well. Even through COVID, some have done really well because they've got a loyal customer base and people have money to spend, right? But that's only like 20% of the public at large, 25%. But they're not going anywhere. Cafes, bookshops, clothes boutiques, it's a very small part of the economy, but they're not going anywhere. And then you've got the other huge people, Tesco. They're not going anywhere. But it's basically everybody else. People like Topshop, Debenhams. You don't have the personal connection. You don't have the low cost. You don't have the choice, right? You don't follow them on Instagram. So there's nothing there going for them. And what I think we need to think about now in terms of the high street is that, so those independent businesses, how do we get more of them, right? And I think that has to do with a national investment bank, local investment banks, so more people can start their own businesses. I think we need to review business rates. That should not be the primary way by which councils are funding themselves. One thing I was going to mention earlier, Debenhams, by the way, a company like Debenhams, because it's such huge floor space, they will be paying huge, colossal business rates to local councils. And councils, of course, have seen their central funding from Westminster cut, and they've been dependent on that stuff. So this is going to be a sort of double-edged sword for local government. Yes, you're losing lots of jobs, but you're also losing lots of business rates, hugely important funds. So I think it's about encouraging independence, but that's going to take money and resources. It's not about support local, #support local. We need to be giving very cheap credit to people to start businesses, particularly which have a social bottom line, whether it's employee ownership, sustainable, organic produce, or it's meeting a certain kind of socially productive or useful end. I also think then you also need to reimagine the high street and what kind of businesses do we not see that we should be seeing. And the first one that comes to my mind, this is going to sound stupid, is a dentist. We don't have enough dentists in this country. Everybody has teeth. A lot of people in Britain don't have great teeth, right? That's the sort of business that's socially useful. There's clearly demand for it, but it's not there right now. That's the kind of thing where you say, well, we should have government intervention. That's why people created the welfare state in the first place. On top of that, you're probably going to need more bespoke businesses for older people moving forward, kind of half care, half social space, social activity. And clearly you're also going to need more housing. And I think it's an opportunity for people to, again, fall back in love with city centre living. But I don't think that has to be these disgusting tower blocks. I don't think it should be which is talked about elsewhere in that documentary, these student blocks. There's one part of Portsmouth we go to. There's a stretch of road in Portsmouth, 4,000 students, or there's 4,000 students can live in this tiny bit of land. And, you think it's Manhattan. Like, no, this is Portsmouth. It's a city on the south coast of England. And it's not just unique to Portsmouth, by the way, this huge presence of universities, which I argue is itself a reflection of the decimation of the high street. So I think housing, supporting independence, and making them nicer places to be. I think a big policy that was being talked about by Labour under Corbyn and McDonnell, free buses. I think literally just put on free bus services for people if they want to go to certain places, including town centres. It's very, very doable. This is not rocket science. You just need to change the incentives. Right now, all the incentives are stacked against town centres and high streets. We can change that, but it's a political question.
Super interesting. I like the extent to which you've been covering high streets in depth. No one else on the left is doing it, Aaron. We've got a lovely comment here. Liv O with 20 quid. Thank you for everything. I nick all your analysis when talking to mates, then remember they also listen to you. Would have loved you to have covered today's deportation and yesterday's High Court judgment on hormone blockers on the show, though. In terms of the deportation, I think we did discuss that last week, but there was a great Novara Media article about that yesterday morning. And on the hormone blockers, I was considering doing something about that. It's a very interesting story. What I would recommend for anyone interested in the High Court judgment, which basically has banned without going to court first the use of hormone blockers on people who are under 16. If you're interested in that story, it's a very interesting one, very worrying actually. I would absolutely recommend going to Sean Fay's Instagram. And she shared an amazing video yesterday of her sort of talking through all of the controversies, which meant I understood it way more than I did beforehand. So I do recommend going to have a look at that. And thank you for the £20 super chat. It is @.SeanFay on Instagram. It's just come up on my Comstock. Since Keir Starmer took over Labour this spring, he has made it a priority to woo back the wealthy donors that flocked to the party under Tony Blair. In November, The Times reported that one of those cash-rich returnees was property tycoon David Abrams. So according to The Times, Starmer had sent a personal letter to Abrams soliciting donations. Now, at the time, we raised concerns that these developments would once again make Labour a vehicle for wealthy interests. This is a property developer, remember? There were previous controversies about potentially favours being offered to this property developer because of his closeness to, at the time, New Labour. However, there are even deeper problems with this new relationship. They have been revealed in the last couple of days by The Guardian, and then also other people on social media who have gone through his internet history, which is not a pretty sight. We can take a look at The Guardian story. So you can see there, Keir Starmer urged to return donations from Islamophobic property developer. And we can go to some quotes from the article in question. So they write, Abrams' tweets included suggestions that Muslims have mixed loyalties, that conservative Muslim culture is inherently violent, and that Muslim youth have a propensity for suicide. Don't think I know how to divide political Islam from moderates and fundamentalists, Abrams posted in 2013. It is the very nature of the beast. As recently as this January, he tweeted the claim that while Israel was a brand new high-tech state with new inventions to benefit mankind, its close neighbours chose terrorism and invented suicide bombers. And it's not just Muslims who are the subjects of racism in his tweets. Not that that would matter. These tweets are all appalling enough. Let's have a look at some of the other tweets that were sort of dug up from this guy's account. We've got this. So he's got a penchant for calling Jews who don't support Israel self-hating. So you can see the worst offenders are self-hating Jews. We have too many of them. And he says, self-hating Jews, always the worst type. So this is someone who Keir Starmer, you've got to remember, wrote personally to ask if he would like to reconsider donating to the Labour Party. On top of this, we've got in 2018, when a black woman received racist abuse on a Ryanair flight, he used it as an excuse to complain about a completely unrelated event on a bus in the United States. Let's get this one up. So he writes, totally unacceptable for black women to suffer vile abuse on Ryanair flight, but happened in reverse when travelled on public bus after visit to Graceland. After general abuse, almost lynched by baying mob at terminus driver, had to lock doors before driving to a different location. Completely bizarre response to someone suffering racial abuse, racial discrimination on an aeroplane. This is definitely the most jaw-dropping tweet, though, from Labour's new high-profile donor. David Abrams in 2017 tweets, #President Zuma, most black South Africans spoke to earlier in the year preferred white rule as less corrupt and more viable and professional. Now he's literally defending apartheid. There are lots of debates in the moment about what you're allowed to call apartheid and not in the Labour Party. Are you allowed to call Israel apartheid? Are you allowed to compare it to South African apartheid? This guy, I mean, you don't have to worry about that particular debate here because this guy's literally speaking positively about South African apartheid. The thing that everyone agrees was racial white supremacy. Aaron, there are calls for Starmer to give back Abrams' donation, but as far as I can tell, there hasn't been much comment or, beyond this story, which was not written by the Guardian politics team. It was written by a different journalist at the Guardian. I haven't seen any of the lobby pick this up.
Nope.
And I haven't seen Labour forced to really comment on it. But This is someone who Starmer personally wrote to ask to become a donor to the party, who has now been sort of found out as having tweeted. I mean, I think most people agree that many of those tweets count as blatant racism, especially the Islamophobic ones.
Yeah.
The comment about South Africa just mind-boggling. How is this able to stand? It's a bit of an overblown way of putting it, but how can this happen without any pushback whatsoever?
It speaks to the complete brazen hypocrisy and duplicity of many of the people in the liberal media, particularly The Guardian, The New Statesman, the BBC, who, imagine if this was Jeremy Corbyn donor. Imagine if Jeremy Corbyn had written to a donor saying, please come back to the Labour Party, and this was a person who said that actually black South Africans preferred apartheid. Can you imagine? It would be a story going on for weeks. But this, like you say, only appears in The Guardian because it's not being covered by the politics team. I wonder why, right? How firm is their commitment to anti-racist politics, you wonder? And that's a question, by the way. That's a question. If they want to answer it, if they want to come on the show, they're more than welcome to. How firm is the commitment of Keir Starmer to anti-racist politics? Again, he's welcome to come on the show. Whenever we write a story, we always go to Labour for comment. We don't get anything. And even to this story, when Labour are contacted, it's pure boilerplate, And this all comes in the aftermath of that report by the Labour Muslim Network, which found that more than 50% or around 50% of Muslim Labour Party members, supporters, don't trust the leadership to act on this. That's terrible. Furthermore, you've got around 1/3 of Labour Party member supporters have either experienced or observed Islamophobia in the Labour Party. So it's present, it's being observed, they don't trust the leadership to do anything about it. And when you see a story of this scale being reported in the national media, the leadership knows they have to do so little because their backside is covered so much in the liberal press, and that this won't blow up, they can respond with pure boilerplate. And I think it's hugely insulting to a number of people. It's not just insulting to Muslims, which it is, or to black people, which it is. It's also hugely insulting to the many people who've been involved in the debate around anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and have done so with entirely good intentions. Many, many people. And it just seems to me, when you look at this story, the way it's being responded to, both by the parts of the media and by Keir Starmer's lot, there was no good faith coming from them on this. It's shocking. It is shocking. He's deleted his Twitter account for a reason. I'm sure if people really wanted to look, there was much, much more. And it wasn't that he was just contacted and he started giving money back to Labour again. It was in the Sunday Times, I think a couple of weeks ago. So this was a story that was actively briefed to the press by somebody. Might not have been Starmer, might have been Mandelson, it might have been somebody else in the Labour Party. Mandelson, by the way, is quoted in that same article saying this is a sign that people are coming back. The people we want, they're coming back. Is anybody going to Peter Mandelson now saying, do you have a comment about David Abrahams saying that black South Africans prefer apartheid? Of course they're not. I mean, my God, we knew there was duplicity and hypocrisy in British politics, but this story is just remarkable.
You just saw me squinting at my laptop there, because what I was checking is, because it might seem odd that we're critiquing The Guardian whilst talking about a Guardian story, and fair play to Damien Gale, who has written up this story. But what I was checking was Jessica Elgert, who is she's their main lobby reporter, hasn't tweeted about this story.
It's crazy.
Which shows that it's not seen as a politically controversial story. Lobby journalists, what they tend to do is they tweet about stuff that they think, oh, this will cause problems for Keir Starmer.
Why?
But no one thinks this will cause problems for Keir Starmer because no one cares about, well, either this form of racism or they don't have any desire whatsoever to hold Keir Starmer's feet to the fire.
Jessica Olga will not tweet something which is disadvantageous for the Starmer leadership. She won't. And so we on Novara Media have had this for years. Oh, you're just propagandist for Corbyn, even though I disagreed with the Corbyn leadership on open selection, on the General Secretary's office, on a whole bunch of things. I thought it should be far more accountable to members. We publicly disagreed where we publicly disagreed, right? Ash on policing or migration, on Brexit policy, right? And yet these people, it was all projection, Michael. This idea that, Novara is just, they're outriders for the leadership. That's what these people are doing. There's a very clear story of public interest, which clearly undermines Keir Starmer and his leadership's claims to being anti-racist. Labour have always been an anti-racist party. Except, by the way, when we all went round gathered around Phil Willis 10 years ago and said he was a good guy and he hadn't done anything wrong, despite the fact his campaign published brazenly Islamophobic campaign literature. We're back to that place again now, where people just don't really need to talk about it. But here's the problem for Labour, is that their strongest base amongst the electorate, yes, it's renters, yes, it's young people, but it's also people of colour, and it's Muslims, and it's black people. And if they genuinely have the perception, which, by the way, I think is warranted, if they genuinely have the perception that their votes are being taken for granted by the Labour Party, there's going to be a problem. If you're taking the votes of Muslims for granted, and yet you play silly buggers when it comes to Kashmir, you completely override democratically agreed policy on the party, or you basically ignore what your own Muslim members are saying with regards to Islamophobia, guess what? Muslim supporters and voters are going to be a bit less keen to vote for you next time round. There's going to be an electoral overhead there. We're going to find out. Labour clearly don't think it's a major problem for them that somebody like David Abrahams is donating money to the party, despite what he said about the key groups that are most supportive of Labour when it comes to election time. It's a real slap in the face.
We've got a bit more on Abrams in a moment. First of all, if you're new to this channel, if you're enjoying what you're seeing, do hit the subscribe button. Tysky Sour goes live every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 7 p.m. And we put out these clips on a regular basis. So it's worth being subscribed and hitting that notification button. On Abrams, we have spoken about him before, because the only problem with him isn't these racist tweets. It's also that his relationship with the Labour Party in the past represented basically everything that was wrong with the Labour leadership's close ties with the corporate establishment. That meant that we couldn't really trust that they were working in the interests of the many, not the few. This is a clip from a friend of the show in a previous job explaining why Abrams' donations never really reflected well on those in receipt of them.
David Abrahams' business is property, and that means he's routinely involved with seeking planning permission for projects here in the North East. At the highest level, planning is a political process, both in Whitehall and in the Labour-controlled councils of the North East. As you can see, there are quite a lot of them. It's politicians that get to decide on Mr. Abrahams' projects. So knowing whether he's giving them money is above all relevant to that. Another area of the North East Mr. Abrahams took an interest in was Sedgefield, the then constituency of Prime Minister Tony Blair. In 2005 and again this year, a Mr. D. Martin of Acorn Residential Estates is listed as a consultee for Sedgefield's local development framework. Actually, Mr. Abrahams and D. Martin are the same person. So what representations did Mr. D. Martin make to the Borough Council? Actually, none, says the council. However, with the constituency Labour Party it was different. He was, said one local Labour politician, a hanger-on. Another said he often sent a note to Tony congratulating him. He was invited to Blair's farewell speech, says one source, as someone you could rely on not to stand up and heckle. Despite not living there, nor having any business with the council, he came along to various things of Tony's as a member.
So this is someone who it seems Starmer specifically sought out to say, oh, we think you should come back into the fold. Labour is once again a party for billionaires. And he would have well known, because this was a big deal at the time, that's why it was on Newsnight, that David Abrams was always a controversial donor to the Labour Party because he was a property developer who, it appeared, was getting favourable treatment from Labour authorities after having donated to the Labour Party. A clear conflict of interest there. And this is the kind of thing that, for all his faults, Jeremy Corbyn was moving the party away from. He was saying, no longer are we going to be, in cahoots with Britain's corporate establishment, because we know that so long as we're reliant on donors in the city or property developing donors, then that is going to undermine any potential that this party has to change the country for the better. And if you look at the people who were close to Tony Blair, there is nothing that tells you more about the completely, morally degraded nature of the new Labour regime. And for Keir Starmer to be saying, I want to go straight back to those same old faces who, are completely tied up with the worst parts of New Labour, and now we can see also send racist tweets, that is pretty goddamn concerning.
Well, in their Zone 2 dinner parties, which is all that matters to these people, these people, and it is very much a bubble. It sounds like a cliche. I sound like Nigel Farage saying it, but it's true. Because of the way this country works, so much political, social, economic power is concentrated in London. My God, Keir Starmer's constituency has the Guardian office in it. It's just so absurd. And who are they listening to? And whose opinions count? And who matter? For Keir Starmer, it's not black and brown members who want to... and white members too, but I'm saying that in the context of this guy making Islamophobic and I think anti-black racist remarks in his tweets. They don't want to talk about Jeremy Corbyn. They want to be talking about a Green New Deal, the housing crisis, by the way, because many of them rent. They want to be talking about universal credit and what kind of economy we build after COVID. They don't want to be doing this. This is entirely of Keir Starmer's making. This nonsense civil war is entirely of his making. And I think partly because he's actually got no policies. I think and that's something nobody's talking about. He wants to stay relevant. He wants to be in the news, but he actually hasn't got anything to offer anybody because he doesn't really know what he believes. He doesn't know what kind of policies he'd want to do. He doesn't know what he'd like to do with power. And that presents a major problem. So how do you keep yourself relevant? How do you get pats on the back from the right-wing media? And how can you make yourself look like you're doing something? Because of COVID, he can't do events. He can't do a tour. He can't Zoom all day. He probably is doing a fair bit of that too. So I think that's a big part of that. But it's insulting to members. It's insulting to members. It's taking members for granted. And if Labour continue to piss off black and brown voters, if they continue to piss off renters, if they continue to alienate young people, if they really don't seem particularly interested in a radical green policy which is fit to the task when it comes to what we have to do with regards to climate change, they're going to struggle. They are going to struggle. Does that mean they're going to lose more seats next time round? Maybe not. Maybe they'll win another 10 seats. I have no idea. By the way, with boundary reform, which is in the background to all of this, which we may get in 2023, it may be academic. You may see a huge change anyway. But my God, Labour haven't got hope in hell if they alienate young people, minorities, renters. No chance. But for Keir Starmer, and again, you go back to a materialist analysis, conditions determine consciousness. If you're a wealthy guy, and I don't care about his background, right? If you're a wealthy guy and you've been at the top of your game professionally for 20, 30 years, he doesn't know what it's like for renters who are struggling, right? The injustice of how this country's economy works, I think, can be summed up with the mortgage holiday. If you have a mortgage, you can take 3 months off, even if you're earning the same amount of money, and you can have a new kitchen fitted. You can have an extra special Christmas, You can convert the attic. But if you're a renter and you've lost your job, sorry. And I just think that's so absurd and dangerous. And the shift from Corbyn to Starmer has also seen the shift away from somebody who's a tribune of that, who would at least highlight that inconsistency. And by the way, in doing so would make it a salient political issue. And I genuinely believe if Corbyn was the Labour leader, I have no idea what he'd be polling. But things like that wouldn't be happening. The Tories would have to respond, like they did with furlough, for instance, quite early doors when this crisis unfolded. Labour are not setting the agenda one bit. And like I said, I think that's partly because Starmer doesn't even know what he'd like to do with power. In a way, that's understandable. He's only been a politician for 5 years.
Let's go to some super chats. Some of them reflecting what you've just been saying, Aaron. Nishat, 1976 with 15 quid. Thank you very much. Really not sure if I can stay in a party where, as a Muslim, I feel like I'm being trolled by the leader. Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I mean, it's not for me to say. I'm not sure if I would say troll, but I mean, what it seems to me is that there's just a lack of interest. And the main reason there's a lack of interest is because Starmer does anti-racism by PR. He'll only sort of answer a question if he thinks that it's, if someone's making political trouble for him. And this is an issue that basically he can ignore because people like, the lobby team at every British newspaper has no interest in this particular story because they're all wearing kid gloves when it comes to Keir Starmer. I would say, I mean, there are people organising on this very issue. So it's the Labour Muslim Network, which is probably worth following and getting involved in. They put out a great report very recently. So I feel like there could be movement here, although it doesn't seem like that Keir Starmer really cares about this particular issue.
Can I say, as a British Iranian, in the last month, what have we seen? A family of 5 Iranians drowned in the Channel, including 3 children, one who was 18 months old. The leader of the opposition has not said anything. Now, for people to say, well, the Tories haven't said anything, that's not the point. I'm not a member of the Conservative Party. I don't think Boris Johnson cares about those things. I would hope that Keir Starmer would say something about the fact that we've got 18-month children dying in the English Channel trying to come to this country. He said nothing. You see the murder of an Iranian scientist in Iran, in Tehran. I think in Alborz, in North Tehran. Civilian scientist. People say, well, is it working on a nuclear weapons program? This is state terror. The leader of the Labour Party is meant to call this out. It was an extrajudicial, illegal murder. It was a killing. You can't do this stuff. And as a British Iranian, I just feel like our lives don't matter as much. Quite frankly, if an Iranian 18-month-old kid, 18-month-old child can die on the Channel. Civilian scientists can be shot dead in the street. If they were American, if they were French, of course it would be a story, but again, I don't care about, well, I do care. I know we haven't got much agency over how the media reports these things, but my God, the leader of the Labour Party, somebody who's meant to be advancing the interests of working class people in this country, and who's meant to be particularly out there for minorities in a broader political environment when nobody else will be, come on, do better.
Beetle Greg 07 with a fiver. What is Starmer doing? What is Starmer going to do about Islamophobia in the Labour Party? I want to see real actions, not just fancy words. I mean, the first thing he could obviously do is give back David Abrams' money and suspend him from the party. Because I mean, if you think about it, if a left-wing Labour member had tweeted something involving sort of invoking dual loyalties and saying, well, I don't think we can trust them because they're loyal to another country, they would have been suspended on the dot, and they would have found out about it from the press because they wouldn't even, they wouldn't have got the email. They'd just been like, that person is suspended right now, right here. And this guy, when they're asked about it, they say, oh, sorry, we're against racism in all its forms. So either that's them not caring about this particular form of racism, or them thinking we only kick out people when it's politically difficult for us, or them thinking this guy's actually giving us quite a lot of money, so we're going to let this one pass.
Or equally, we want big donors. If we start making it an issue, what you've tweeted in the past, maybe we won't get as many as we'd like. That's what it boils down to. Follow the money.
Yeah. Rusty Sleeves with 1503. This is a nice one. Aaron, in my opinion, you are the most articulate political thinker of our generation. Book requested for Christmas. Please can you tell Mr. Merds to take the stairs next time?
Mr. who?
Mr. Merds.
Mr. Merds, take the stairs next time.
Do you know what that means?
No.
Oh, it's a very nice comment anyway.
Very nice comment. Thank you very much. If you're referring to fully automated electric communism, it's now out in paperback. And you don't have to agree with everything, as we talked about earlier on with the cellular agriculture stuff. It doesn't all have to be depressing. There are some amazing technologies that could be very liberating for humans over the next couple of decades. We just need to create the politics that underpins it all.
Well, what the Mr. Merds?
I'm at a loss
thinking
as well.
about that now. Maybe they'll clarify. Mickey Mouse with a fiver. Love you guys. Keep telling us stories other people won't. Thank you. Thank you so much. We will do that. And we will especially be able to do that in all different forms of multimedia and including investigative journalism if you go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, or if you are already a subscriber, which means I am already so grateful to you, potentially consider upping your monthly subscription before Christmas so that we can increase our monthly income by $5,000 a month so that we can keep building out this organisations. We have so many plans for the new years, including, yes, as we said, a lot more original reporting, people reporting from different parts of the country, phone-in shows, more regular Tyskys. The plans are huge. but we do need your support. Aaron, Britain's best political thinker. I agree with that.
I think that's unfair on a lot of other people. I think I contribute to the debate, and I think can I actually say, Michael, if we're doing compliments right now, I think Michael Walker's been Novara Media's MVP this year, most valuable player. He knows that. He can't even hide that.
I'm organised and reasonable, but you're much better at an immediate, quick, articulate take that draws on a lot of knowledge.
That's very kind of you, Michael. That's very kind of you. And I just want to say as well, building on what you were outlining there in terms of next year, 2021 is the year of Novara Media. I think a lot of people at the beginning of 2020, because of course there was that terrible general election result in December 2019, they thought, oh, that's them gone. And actually, we've doubled our subscribers on YouTube this year. We've got most of our views on YouTube in 2019 because Michael's coverage of COVID was outstanding because of what we did with the Labour leak story. If you support us, we can do a lot more of that. And I really think by 2024, we can be one of the most effective, influential people out there. Doing some really good stuff, not just opinion, but news gathering, investigative journalism, really good stuff, really shifting the debate.
Which also would have made a really big difference over the last 5 years. When I think if there were people, doing independent, original reporting on some of the controversies surrounding the Labour Party, that could have shifted the narrative. Because the other side had an easy ride, let's admit it. Okay, we are going to wrap up for this evening. Aaron Bastani, it's been an absolute pleasure, especially to have you in person in the studio. Feels like a real privilege.
It was my privilege. Well, hopefully we will.
It's allowed now.
We'll be seeing this will be the norm. Hopefully, and we won't have another lockdown.
I hope so too.
Solidarity with everybody, by the way, in Tier 3.
Yeah, solidarity with everyone in Tier 3. May you come out soon. But no, I mean, obviously, the fact that people are going back into Tier 3 now is a sign of the government's complete incompetence. Apparently, London was supposed to go into Tier 3, but then Boris Johnson said the economic cost would be too large. So we are very much benefiting from the completely distorted priorities and favouritism of this government. So, yeah, solidarity. If you are in Tier 3 for now, you've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.